Yo, what's going on, guys? So, as you may be aware, Stellar Blade collab just dropped, and with it we got Eve, and that's who I'll be talking about today. Firstly, I want to briefly go over what she does. Secondly, I'll talk about some teams which I tested her in. Thirdly, I want to talk about her performance in each of those teams. Then I want to talk about my recommendation on her investment, and then finish off with some closing thoughts. So, without further ado, let's go. Alright, let's take a look at her skills and see what she does exactly. Alright, for her skill 1, whenever she enters battle, she increases her own crit rate by 60%. Whenever she lands 44 critical hits, she deals 240% of her attack as damage 3 times, and whenever she faces an enemy that is iron weak, the damage taken by that enemy is up 10%. Now, her skill 2 activates when entering battle. She enters the Eagle Eye type Exospine state, which increases her attack and her max ammo. Now, the second condition is that whenever she lands 10 normal attacks against an iron weak enemy, she reloads 3 rounds. So this means that her effective ammo capacity is quite high. That's why we don't want any max ammo rolls or max ammo buffers, because she already has a lot of max ammo due to this second skill passive. Now, moving on to her burst skill, she does 457% of her attack as damage 6 times. Now, the second part of her burst skill is quite interesting because it increases the scaling of skill 1 and skill 2 by 100%. So this 240% of of her attack as damage 3 times increases to 480% of her attack as damage whenever she lands 44 critical hits. So overall, as you can see, she is very dependent on critting. She wants very high crit rate, which means that she's gonna scale well with crit damage as well. Alright, so now moving on to some of the teams that I wanted to show you guys that I tested. Let's go and take a look at that. Alright, so let's take a look at the teams. First off, we have Leader with the Maid duo. We have Rapi and Eve. Now, the idea behind the Maid duo is that Mast increases the crit rate, the reload speed, and the crit damage of all her allies, which all positively impact Eve. She wants all of those stats. Now, next up, we have Volume. Volume does, what she does is that she increases crit rate of her allies, as well as reducing the cooldown of burst, which is very good. However, the thing to note about this team is that Volume gives 30% crit rate, Mast gives 20% crit rate, and she already has 60% crit rate, which means that overall she will have 110% crit rate, which is over critting. You only want 100%. Anything above that doesn't matter. But still, both of these give crit damage, which are very good for Eve. So I wanted to test that. Now, another B1 that would work very well is Miranda, Treasure Miranda, especially. She gives 30% crit rate as well as 89% crit damage, which is huge for Eve. And on top of that, she works off burst, so you could technically use her maybe with Crown here. For example, we put Crown and Mermaid, so we would burst on Mermaid and she would be giving all those other benefits without actually bursting. So that's something that you can do. I don't have Treasure Miranda, so I couldn't test that, but she would be even better than the Volume in this team. Now, for the third team, we got the classic. We got Crown and Naga, the Crown Naga duo. First up, we got with Leader. I wanted to see how Eve would be affected with the damage to core and the attack buff of Naga, and then I wanted to also test this with Little Mermaid and see how her extra burst would affect the overall performance. And then after that, I wanted to also check between the buffs between Naga and between Crown, or not Crown, Helm, Treasure Helm. see how the buffs would differ and how that would affect Eve especially and her damage. And then I tested both of the teams with Naga and Helm, but instead of Rappi I put Red Hood in here and see how they would compare in those two themes. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the spreadsheet and the numbers and see how they performed in each of these teams, and see how Eve especially performed in terms of the Iron roster. Alright, so first off we have the maid duo with leader. You have Rappi doing 975 million, then you have Eve doing 764 million, doing 78% of Rappi's damage, which is keeping up quite well in my opinion. Then you have the maid duo with volume with Red Hood, doing a little bit less damage, however still benefiting quite well from the buffs. This team is not very Red Hood friendly, as I stated, and this is also the team that had 110% crit rate, which is over critting. So Eve was doing quite a bit more damage than Red Hood. Then next up we have Mermaid with the maid duo with Rappi and Eve. Now here Eve did 77% of Rappi's damage, which also is quite good. We have Brown Naga with leader Rappi and Eve, also right around the same amount in terms of percentages. Now for the further one, the next one is Crown with Naga, Little Mermaid, Eve and Rappi. Again, right around the same percentage, right, of Rappi's damage, which again I think is quite good. I mean, Rappi is very, for the lack of a better word, she's busted. So 78% of Rappi's damage is quite good. Now here we have with Helm, the same team with Helm. Now here we can see that Rappi does not benefit from Helm as much as she does from Naga. Now Eve does a little bit, is affected a little bit less by this change. So here we have 81%. She does a little bit better in this team than Rappi. From previous team, obviously Rappi is still doing more damage, performing way better. Now next up we have Red Hood in the same team with Naga, and then Red Hood with Helm. And then here we can see that here we have an outlier, right? Helm's attack buff is weaker than Naga's while giving crit rate to Eve. And so Eve is benefiting from Helm in this team way more than Red Hood is. Now with Naga, Red Hood scales with attack quite well, so she benefits from a higher attack and also from the core damage. So we have a little bit of a less impactful advantage for Eve here. However, Eve is still doing more damage. So overall, Eve is doing about the same damage on average as Red Hood. In certain situations she does more, in certain situations she does less. However, what we know is that Eve is about, you know, between 20 and 25% worse than Rappi. Alright, so now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what my recommendation is for her investment. Now first, for a budget investment, I recommend going 7, 4, 4, then increasing her skill 1 to 10, her skill 2 to 7, and then burst to 7. And then if you really want to maximize her potential, going all out, going for 10, 10, 10. And now for her overload lines, we get the universal lines of attack percentage and elemental damage. They're gonna benefit her. And then for her third line, I recommend going for crit damage, because she already has quite a bit of crit rate, and she also goes with teammates that provide crit rate, so she's likely to over crit. So you might not need a lot of crit rate, if at all. And hit rate is going to benefit her a little bit. However, it's not going to be as beneficial as crit damage. So overall, these three are my recommendation for her overload pieces. So for my closing thoughts on Eve, for me personally, I'm giving her an S rank. While I did say that she's similar to Red Hood in terms of damage, she does not have all the utility that Red Hood does. Like, for example, the attack team buff, the high burst generation, the pierce damage, self-healing, and what I like to call is the last stand mechanic, where she's able to go through burst 1, burst 2, and then burst 3 to full burst on her own, right? So with all that taken into consideration, I think she is worse than Red Hood in my opinion, but that doesn't mean that she is bad, right? For a situation where she is heavily catered to, for example, like the upcoming solo raid, I believe that she'll be closer to that SS rank, but I'm expecting her to fall off a bit after that is over, right? She is by no means a must-have unit, but a welcome one and a decent addition to the Iron DPS'es, right? So I definitely would get at least one copy of her. I got 4 because I was bored, but yeah. So that's going to do it for this Eve review. Let me know if you're satisfied with her performance, and if you're pulling or not. Leave a like, comment, and sub, and I'll see you on the next one.